For many people in Boston, life in the city means putting up with some noise. Our guest recently did a survey on noise in Greater Boston and how it registers with local residents. We'd like to welcome a doctoral candidate in the Department of Environmental Health at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Erica Walker, and a professor of geography at Salem State University, Marc Osuna. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start with Erica Walker. This is a commonplace part of living in the city. When did it strike you that this is something that demanded some research?
Right. So I lived in a shared space environment in an apartment building, and I had these neighbors who lived above me they had kids, and they would just run constantly throughout the day. And it started to affect my sleeping patterns, my happiness, my mood. And so what I did was I started to kind of look on the internet of like, how do I handle this situation? Who do I speak to? And then when I started doing that, I saw a whole community of people who were struggling with noise issues, not just with people above them or people beside them, but with aircraft noise, road traffic noise. And then it just kind of expanded from there. Like, this is actually a serious health problem. It's actually impacting a lot of people's lives.
Marc Osuna, you know something about noise because you live in East Boston, so I certainly know about the jets. But what about the patterns in noise that you found in this study?
Well, that's one of the really interesting things, and it's kind of one of the things that's most striking about it is that we were looking at two dimensions of noise. We were looking at it from a sound perspective, a monitored sound perspective, using instrumentation to monitor the levels of sound, but we were also surveying people to get their experience of sound. And so what we found was that those two don't always line up. So the distribution of sound across the city, which we've mapped out and we've organized in ways that you can kind of summarize what's going on, shows one pattern. You see some areas not surprising. Noise levels are loud where there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of construction going on. But when you start looking at how people experience noise in terms of their annoyance levels on the various factors, whether it's related to aircraft or leaf blowers or cars, those don't always match up with the noise levels. And that's actually consistent with the literature. But it's interesting to see that you've got some areas where people are kind of upset, and you've got areas where you have a very high background noise, particularly in the central part, downtown Boston. So just that discrepancy alone is kind of interesting to see, and we've placed all these maps online so people can look at them and kind of see the patterns that, we'll try to divine the patterns that they can see themselves.
What about the effects on people? I'm thinking, sometimes, 45 minutes before my alarm clock goes off, I hear a backup beeper in the street, and then I can't sleep for the next, 45 minutes. Transpose that to lots of other people. What does that mean? Is that a big deal?
Yes. So if you read the epidemiological literature, decibel levels as low as 40 decibels, and we're talking about the sound of the studio or sound of a quiet office, it starts to impact health in terms of like mood, sleep disruption. And then if we move from 40 decibels up to, 50, 60, 70 decibels, which is, we're getting more in terms of like being near a highway or having an ambulance go by you constantly, that's in the 90 decibel range. You're looking at disease manifestation in the cardiovascular level, and there's some research that's out there that's talking about the effects not only on cardiovascular health but also mental health.
And Marc, let's talk about the ramifications here, because one of the things that you're faced with in East Boston is that Massport wants to expand and have more traffic at Logan Airport.
Well, so full disclosure, I'm a resident of East Boston,
right.
as well as a researcher, right, looking at this,
right.
And actually that's kind of how we met each other in a way. She was doing the research and she was surveying people, and we ran into each other, and it turns out I can do the research, or allowed to do the mapping that could look at this data and kind of look at patterns. But residents of East Boston are particularly concerned about the idea of expanding Logan Airport because they're already very upset with the levels of sound that currently occur. One of the problems there is that Logan does have a system for monitoring sound, and there are actual regulations and expectations about levels of sound, but the measurements that they use, or the standards that they use, measure one type of sound, and they don't measure people's experiences of sound. And so what we find is that, because their experiences are different from monitored sound levels, you have to ask, how do we reconcile that? And plus we have the fact that there's other forms of sound that we don't measure, but research seems to show that or can have an effect on people physically as well as mentally. And so that's an open question. And I think it's one that at least East Boston residents who are not happy with the things as they stand are very concerned about what it might mean in the future if the increased amount of traffic that's flying over that neighborhood.
Eric Walker, looking at some other parts of the city, I was a little puzzled by the difference between Dorchester and Mattapan. Mattapan being the quiet one.
Right.
I mean, if you live near a certain street, I expect a certain amount of noise, but I didn't expect generally there would be that much difference.
Right. Well, a lot of our report card grades, because I think you're referring to the report card, they're also heavily dependent on people who respond. So we didn't receive as many responses in Mattapan in terms of like their perception towards noise, which is one of the big grading criteria in the report card. So, so we had to, so due to small sample size, we kind of had to not only collapse Mattapan with the quieter neighborhood, we also had to, kind of weigh the grade on a smaller number of people. But they are different, but like each community has its loud areas and each community has its quiet areas. Unfortunately, we have to grade on, the louder areas dictate the quieter areas. But there are some similarities in terms of noise levels, but there's also some differences. Like Dorchester seemed to be bothered with aircraft noise, transportation noise, but Mattapan, you had a larger section of more suburban-like areas, so you got the quiet areas
Lots
as well.
of single-family houses in those streets.
Exactly,
I know exactly what you mean. By the way, finally, Erica, if people want to get in touch about this, participate in some way, is there some way they can look that up?
Yes, they can go to our website, noiseinthecity.org, and they can fill out the survey and look at the results as well from our survey.
Well, thank you both very much, Erica Walker and Marc Osuna.